We're currently in the middle of a series entitled Parenting 101, and as you can tell by the title, we're focusing on the basics of parenting. In other words, the things you know in order to be a good parent, or what we would call a successful parent. You see, there are certain things that you want to do, and there are certain things that you don't want to do when it comes to raising your children. And if you don't know what those things are, you can really screw your kids up and not even realize it. Some of you are screwed up as a result of how your parents raised you. Well, hopefully you won't make the same mistakes that your parents made with you when it comes to raising your children. So in this series, I'm going to give you what you need to know in order to be a good parent, in order to be a successful parent, so that you raise godly, independent children. Now, last week I explained how to teach your children to obey. And the way that you do that is by teaching them that there are consequences for disobeying, punitive consequences. And of course, I'm talking about spanking. Now, last week, and I guess it was 2 weeks ago, we had the ice storm last week, and so I decided not to teach on this. So 2 weeks ago, I ran out of time, so I just briefly touched on the subject of spanking. So this morning, I want to go more in depth. And then we're going to talk about the cognitive development of children and how that affects the way that we parent. Because people, that's very important. And it's something every parent needs to know and understand because it affects the way that we parent. Or I should say, it should affect the way that you parent. But first, let's talk about spanking. Turn with me, if you would, to the book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse number 15. This is a verse that I've already shared, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on it. It says, "Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him." Now, I want you to notice that foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. But what does that mean? Well, the word bound is translated from the Hebrew word kashar, and it means to bind or to tie up. So what this verse is saying is that foolishness is tied to the heart of a child. In other words, foolishness is just part of being a child. But that's not good. It sounds cute, but trust me, it's not. You see, the Hebrew word for foolishness is not what we think of when we hear the word foolish. In fact, the word foolishness is translated from the Hebrew word eveleth, and it means imprudent and morally degenerate. Yeah. Doesn't sound so cute now, does it? Now, think about what those two things mean. Imprudent means rash, not exercising sound judgment in practical matters. And that describes a kid to a T, because kids do things without thinking. Stupid things. That's just part of being a kid. If you know my past, you know that I did stupid things as a child. Things that I'm embarrassed of now as an adult, but I was a kid. And kids do stupid things. You know, one of the things they tell you when you pastor is don't pastor in your hometown, because everyone knows your past. And it's true. We're getting ready to have my 40-year reunion from high school in May. In fact, I've been contacted by a few of my classmates, class of 1978. And each one said, "Can't believe that you turned out to be a pastor." That's the power of Jesus. Now, what does morally degenerate mean? Well, degenerate means being below what is considered to be normal or the standard. So a morally degenerate person is someone who has low moral standards. And again, that's a perfect description of a child, because children will tell stories. And that's just a nice way of saying they lie. They'll also take things from other kids, which is stealing. They'll hit other kids, they'll bite other kids, they'll scratch other kids, all because they are morally degenerate. So all kids, to some degree, are imprudent and morally degenerate. Some kids more than other kids, right? But all kids, to some degree, no matter how perfect you think your child is, to some degree your child is imprudent and morally degenerate. But Solomon says the rod of correction will drive it far from them. In other words, spanking will drive foolishness out of a child. It will stop them from being imprudent, and it will make them stop doing things that are morally wrong. But why? Why will spanking do that? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because it causes a child to stop and think. So before they walk over that newly mopped floor with muddy shoes, they'll stop and think about what happened the last time they did that. Because the last time they did that, they got spanked. Because they were told to take your shoes off at the door and don't walk through the newly mopped floor. And if for some reason they do it again without thinking, they're going to get halfway across that floor and they're going to go, "Oh no, I remember what happened last time, and then they're going to get out the little, they're going to try and hide it from you, and they're going to wonder how you knew. It's always amazing. When you're a kid, you always wonder how your parents knew what you did when you so cleverly covered it up. And the next time they bite, they're going to get a swat because biting is wrong. And you want them to know that if they bite, they're going to get spanked. Now, opponents of spanking argue that the only thing that spanking teaches a child is that hitting is okay. But people, that's not true. That's just a bunch of liberal hogwash. That's what's wrong with our educational system today. It's because liberals have taken control of it. And it's being taught in our educational systems. And that's why we are having the problems we're having. The truth is, spanking causes a child to associate punishment with wrong behavior. And it teaches them in a manner that they can understand. You see, the most important formative years of a child is from birth to 4 years old. During that time, they are learning at a phenomenal rate. And their personality and perception of the world is forming. But mentally, they don't have the ability to recognize danger or to truly grasp the consequences of their actions. But they can still learn during those important formative years the difference between right and wrong. And spanking is what develops that. Now, I think it's very important to make a distinction between spanking and physical abuse, because I am not advocating physical abuse. Physical abuse is always wrong, and it will scar a child for life. So let me give you some pointers when it comes to spanking, and let's start with the basics. First of all, you need to start early. In fact, you need to start just as soon as your child understands what the word no means. You see, the longer you go without spanking, the more difficult it will be to train your child to obey. Turn with me, if you would, to the book of Proverbs, chapter 19, verse 18, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It says, discipline your children while there is hope. Sometimes when I get back to the children's department, I think you've waited too long. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Now, let's be honest. We've all looked at certain children and thought, there's no hope for that kid unless God intervenes, right? And what's sad is, normally the kids we're referring to are between the ages of 10 to 12. But you can already tell that they're going to be a juvenile delinquent, and they're going to have a crappy life unless God intervenes. But the problem is, the parents have never disciplined them, or if they have disciplined them, they haven't disciplined them correctly. So you need to discipline your children while there's still hope. In other words, when they're little. And I'm talking about when they're toddlers and preschoolers. As soon as they understand what the word no means. And that's not 2. That's usually somewhere about 7, 8, 9 months old. The truth is, if you wait too long, it may be impossible to correct the damage that's already been done. So you end up with a child with oppositional defiant disorder, which means that you're fighting your child for control of the home. So don't wait until it's too late. You start as soon as they understand what the word no means. Secondly, spank only to the degree necessary to bring repentance. Remember, the goal of discipline is to bring repentance, or in other words, change. Turn to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 9 through 11, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. This is from the New Living Translation, and when we get to verse number 12, you need to highlight it. You need to underline it. You need to put an asterisk in the margin of this. You probably need to copy it and put it on your refrigerator door. All right? Here goes. Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they knew how. But God's discipline is always good for us so that we might share in His holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterwards, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. Do you see that? Spanking is painful. It's meant to be painful. But afterwards, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. People, that's what you want. In your home, if you have children, what your goal is to have a peaceful harvest of right living. So you need to keep this in mind. When a child is no longer rebellious but willing to obey, then the goal has been met, and there's no need to keep on spanking. All you're trying to do is teach your child that there are punitive consequences for disobeying you. And when they've learned that, all you have to do when they're not obeying is ask them, do you need a spanking? And if they respond positively, then you don't need to spank. If they respond negatively, then you spank. You know, all my mom had to say was, wait until your father gets home. And people, I straightened up. There was a peaceful harvest of right living in the Nolan home. Let me just be honest with you just for a second. Do you mind? It's not like I'm dishonest. A person says, you need to quit saying that because it sounds like you're dishonest. I'm just saying, can I go a little bit deeper with you? When the Nolans moved to Tahlequah, everyone thought we were Catholic. And the reason why is because my parents had 5 kids in a period of 7 years. Riddell is 60, Steve is 53. He's the youngest. I'm 57. 5 kids in 7 years. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, and 4 of those kids were boys. And we had friends who were boys who came over, and we would be bouncing off the walls. And Mom would come down there, and she would say, hey, you need to stop doing this. Or she would tell us to do something. And do you think we listened? We just kept bouncing off the walls. And my mom would say, if you don't do what I say, wait till your father gets home. All of a sudden, we could hear her. All of a sudden, we were doing what she said, or we weren't doing what she said, because we understood something. If we didn't do what she told us to do, then when Dad got home, we were going to be spanked. We associated spanking with misbehavior. Wow. There was a peaceful harvest of right living in the Nolan house just by making that comment. Number 3, take time to explain why you're spanking them. Turn to Proverbs chapter 29, verse number 15, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. Now I want you to underline that word reproof. Reproof is translated from the Hebrew word tokekah, and it means to convince or to verbally correct. Now I want you to notice that the rod and the reproof go together. So what this verse is telling us is that we should never spank a child until we first explain to them why they're getting spanked. In other words, a child should always know what they're being spanked for. As an example, I told you not to bite. And I told you that if you bite, you're going to be spanked. Young man, you're getting a spanking. And then after you spank them, and it should be, what does Hebrews 12 tell us? Painful. My mom could not do it painfully. So she always said, wait till your dad gets home. That's what brought that right harvest, or that harvest of right living. But anyways, then you tell them, if you spank again, or if you bite again, I will spank you again. Yeah. Number 4, discipline with dignity. Turn to Job chapter 23, verses 3 through 7. Now, there's an analogy here. Job feels like he's being disciplined. He thinks it's unfair, so he's talking to God. Notice what he says. Oh, that I knew where I might find him. Of course, he also says later on in the book, even though I don't see him, I know he's here. He's all around me. But then he goes further. That I might come to his seat. I would present my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn the words which he would answer and perceive what he would say to me. Would he contend with me by the greatness of his power? No. Surely he would pay attention to me. There the upright would reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. Now, there's an analogy here between us and God and children and parents. But here's what I want you to understand. You don't ever allow a child to talk back to you, but you do give them the right to reason, to clarify, to discuss, or to inform you concerning the issue at hand. In fact, God allows us this luxury, and to be honest, he even allows us to complain a little bit. Yeah. So when you get ready to discipline, especially when a child gets to the second stage of their mental development, and you say, I'm going to spank you, and you tell them why you're going to spank them, and they go, well, wait a minute, let me tell you my side. You listen to their side. You let them explain. You let them reason. You let them describe. You let them defend themselves. And then if they disobeyed, you still go ahead and spank them. That's the bottom line. But you do need to listen, and sometimes you'll be surprised. maybe they don't need a spanking if you hear the story. Number 5, never spank in anger. Now, this is a difficult one because most of the time when our kids do something stupid or they have a moral lapse, it makes us angry. But when we're angry, we're not objective. So when we spank, it's not for the good of the child, it's to alleviate our anger. But we're cautioned against this in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 10. Notice what it says. For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. The insinuation is that spanking in the heat of the moment is always wrong because it's for your pleasure and it's not for the good of the child. Yes, it makes you feel better, but it doesn't teach the child anything except don't make dad mad. And people, that's not the purpose of spanking. The purpose of spanking is for them to associate spanking with misbehavior. The punitive consequences to disobeying. That's what you want them to associate. But let me tell you how most of you parent. You parent when you get angry. So what you'll do is you'll start talking to your kids. Don't do that. I'm only going to tell you one more time. Don't do that. Don't make me get up. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2. All right, buddy, that's it. Then you get up and you finally do something. Let me tell you what you've taught your child. You've taught your child that it's okay to disobey you, but it's not okay to make you mad. So what they do is they learn that they can disobey you as long as they don't push you to the point where you lose it. That's not the purpose of spanking. The purpose of spanking is to teach your child that there are punitive consequences for misbehavior. That's what you want to teach your children. So when you're angry, you need to tell your child to go to the room and you'll deal with them in just a little bit. And then you wait until you're in control of your emotions, and then you can go and administer the appropriate discipline. Because if you discipline in anger, I promise you, you will live to regret it. Look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse number 4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Let me tell you, when you discipline in anger, it makes them angry because it's not right. Even a child knows that. You weren't disciplining them because they did wrong. You were disciplining them because you were angry. It says, rather bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. Now, let me just give you a little piece of advice. If there's a cadence to your swats, you're probably spanking in anger. Everyone knows what I mean by cadence, right? If your swats are in rhythm with your words, I told you to never do that again. That's cadence. That means you're probably in anger. You're not doing it for the good of the child. You're doing it to alleviate your anger. And you usually stop about the time you go, oh, I feel good now. That's not the purpose of spanking, people. And last but not least, realize that when you refuse to spank, you're going to raise an ungodly child. A child that's not going to live in a way that's pleasing to God. Look at Proverbs chapter 23, verse 14. Thou shalt beat him with the rod. Actually, the word rod there means switch. Switch. Thou shalt beat him with the switch, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. Do you see that? According to Solomon, spanking can keep your child from going to hell. How? Well, think about it. How many rebellious children have you seen who truly love the Lord? Not very many. To be honest, I can't think of one. Every rebellious child I know is unsaved. Jesus isn't Lord of their life. They're Lord of their life. They're not only in rebellion to their parents, they're in rebellion to God. God understands this principle which I've already taught. If a child's not going to be in obedience to the authority of their parents, they're not going to be in obedience to the authority of God. And that's what Solomon is trying to teach us. Now, let me give you the flip side of spanking. There are some kids you don't have to spank because you can talk to them. To be honest with you, I never spanked Mike and Macy. How many of you are thinking, oh, thank God the way he teaches? No. I never spanked Mike and Macy. I swatted their diapers, but once they were potty trained, I never did spank them. And you want to know why? It's because I could talk to them and they would repent. And they would never do that again. And people, that's the goal of discipline, repentance. Now, if you were the type of child that didn't need to be spanked, Lisa Nolan, if you were the type of child your parent could talk to, and that was all that was needed, don't think that spanking isn't necessary just because you didn't need to be spanked. Don't think that you can talk to all kids and they'll repent and do the right thing. No. Every child is different. My parents could talk to Riddell and Doug, but I had to be spanked. My parents could sit Riddell and Doug down and say, now, you did this and this is wrong. I don't want you to ever do that again. And Riddell and Doug would never do that again. They would sit me down and say, now, Alan, we don't ever want you to do this again. And I would think inside, I'm not getting spanked. 30 minutes later, I was doing it again. Yeah, I needed to be spanked. You see, each child is different and must be disciplined differently. They must be disciplined according to their personality and nature. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that all kids are the same and they all need to be disciplined the same. People, that's not true. On the other hand, if you needed to be spanked, don't think that every one of your children needs to be spanked when they do something wrong. That might be true, but it might not be true. It depends on the individual child. So, what if one of your kids needs to be spanked because talking to them doesn't do any good? But your other children don't need to be spanked because you can talk to them and they won't do what you tell them not to do. Won't that seem unfair to the child that needs to be spanked if you don't spank everyone? Well, it might seem unfair on the surface, but it's not. In fact, when they accuse you of being unfair or of playing favoritism, it creates a great opportunity to teach that child a very valuable lesson. Here's what you teach your child. This is what you tell them. I talked to them, referring to their siblings, and I told them not to do that ever again, and they didn't do it. They listened to me. I talked to you, and I told you don't do that ever again, and you did it. That's why you're getting spanked, and they're not. It's because you don't listen and obey when I talk to you. So those who don't hear must feel. That's a precept. I want you to write that down. Those who don't hear must feel. That is a precept that every child should learn. And you need to explain to your child what that means. Actually, they'll get it the first time you spank them. But anyways, here's what it means. It means if I tell you to do something and you don't do it, or I tell you not to do something and you do it, that means you're not listening to me. That means you're not hearing what I'm saying. Therefore, if you can't hear, you must feel. And you can get out in public with your child and you're telling them to do something, they're not doing it. All you have to do is get down and whisper. We don't yell at our kids. Cornerstonians don't get in Walmart and yell at their kids. Please don't tell anyone where you go to church if you do that. The more serious you are, the quieter you become. You look down at them and you tell them, those who don't hear must feel. And they know exactly what you mean by that. If they don't do what you say, if they don't hear what you're saying, you're going to spank them. You see, your child must learn that there are consequences to their actions. And the greater the rebellion, the greater the consequences. Now, there are times when spanking doesn't work, especially with problem children who are older, but that's another series. Now, let's talk about the cognitive development of children and how that affects the way that we parent. And I want you to look at the slide on the back wall. Now, as you can see, this slide is meant to illustrate how a child develops mentally. And as you can see, small children only think in concrete terms. Everyone's familiar with the term concrete thinking, right? No? Concrete thinking is the inability to understand abstract concepts. Now, let me give you an example to illustrate what I'm talking about. About a week before Micah Joy turned 4 years old, we started telling her that she was going to have a birthday in a week. And as each day passed, we would say, in 6 days, you're going to turn 4. In 5 days, you're going to turn 4. In 4 days, you're going to turn 4. And then the day finally arrived, and that morning we said, "Happy birthday, Micah Joy." And I'll never forget what she said. With this puzzled look on her face, she said, "Have I turned yet?" You see, she didn't understand the concept of turning a year older. To her, turning was something you did physically. And that's what we mean by concrete thinking. It's the inability to understand abstract concepts. Instead, everything is understood literally. Let me say that again because it's very important. Because until a child reaches about the age of 6 or 7, they are concrete thinkers. That means that they do not have the ability to understand abstract concepts. Everything is understood literally. In fact, that's why children keep asking, "Are we there yet?" when they're in a car for a long period of time. They don't understand the concept of time. So when they ask the question, "Are we there yet?" and you say, "No, it's about an hour more," that means nothing to them. So 5 minutes later, they ask the very same question as they kick the back of your chair, "Are we there yet?" And you get irritated. But what you don't realize is that children up until the age of about 6 or 7 years old are concrete thinkers. At their age, they don't have the mental ability to understand abstract concepts such as the concept of time. Now, this is important to understand when it comes to training a child and the way that you discipline. You see, when it comes to small children who's in this first stage of mental development, you have to communicate in concrete terms. So if your 3-year-old hits his sister, you say, "No, we don't hit," in your parent voice. How many of you have a parent voice? I have a parent voice. I have a parent look. "No, we don't hit our sister. You hit your sister again, I will wear you out." How many of you, when you see me preaching to you, you think, "Man, he's getting mad"? Anyone ever thought that? And I have that look, and I do. That's my parent voice. That's my parent face. You want to know why I'm doing that? You're my spiritual children. Read the Bible. Paul talks about his children, his spiritual children. They're the ones that he either led to the Lord or they're the ones that he's discipling. So he sees them as his spiritual children. In fact, in some places he goes, "Don't make me bring the rod." Yeah. If you read the Johannine epistles, that's the Apostle John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, he keeps talking about my children. Why does he say that? Because they're the ones he's disciplining. And you begin to do that when, disciplining. They're the ones he's discipling. And you begin to do that when you pastor. I begin to think of you as my children. And so I might be preaching and teaching on something, and all of a sudden, I get kind of irritated, and I get into my parent voice. "Don't make me spank you." That's that parent voice. That's that parent look. I'm not angry. That's just what you do. Some of you need to develop your parent voice. You need to develop your parent face. So if your 3-year-old hits his sister, you say, "No, we don't hit. If you hit again, I'll spank you. I'll wear you out." And if they do it again, because many times they're testing you. You drew a line in the sand, so the first thing they do is this. Bam. They just crossed over that line. So you get up, you take that belt off, because a belt will not hurt them physically. I mean, it'll hurt, it'll be painful, but it won't do any permanent damage. And you make sure it stinks. And then you repeat. You don't hit. You hit again, I'll spank you again. I will turn your bottom red. Do you understand me? Yeah. Well, you look mean. That's the parent look. That's the parent voice. Trying to reason with a 3-year-old and explain emotions and how it makes you feel when they misbehave goes right over their head. Because they don't understand emotions. Emotions is an abstract concept. And connecting your feelings to them hitting their sister is an abstract concept. Women, listen to me. When you've got a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and maybe the 4-year-old's a girl and the 3-year-old's a boy, and Billy is playing with his sister, and all of a sudden she does something he doesn't like, he just picks up the truck and he conks her in the head. She starts crying, Mama, Billy hit me. And what do? Billy, don't hit her. See, you hurt her. And when you hurt her, it hurts Mommy. It makes Mommy cry on the inside. My heart is crying. And he looks at you and goes, He doesn't understand that. People, that's an abstract concept that your heart is hurting and aching on the inside. Just state the rule. Billy, I told you not to hit. You hit, you pull out that belt, you spank, and then you tell him again. You hit again, I'll spank you again. If it needs to be harder, it'll be harder. We don't hit. Ever. Now, here's what's sad. Most parents try to reason with their toddler using abstract concepts, and it goes right over the head of their child. And they don't realize that the best discipline at that age, in the first stage of their mental development, is spanking. Because there's an immediate consequence for breaking a rule. And that enables the child to connect the discipline to the disobedience. And people, that's what you want. If you're taking notes, write this down. You want the child to connect the discipline to the disobedience. And spanking is the best way to do that to children who are concrete thinkers. And in the first stage of mental development, it doesn't matter if your child is a genius, they're still a concrete thinker. Yeah. In fact, it is so effective talking about spanking that even a child that's 8 to 9 months old can be taught what no means through the use of spanking. In fact, that's how you teach an infant what no means. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you have an old-style TV that actually has the buttons on the front. Oh yeah, no smart TVs. So your little 8-month-old crawls over to the TV and pulls themselves up, and as they start to push something, you say, no. And it startles them, and they look at you, and you say, no, and they go, huh, no. Don't do that. And then they go, and before you know it, you're over there and you spank that diaper. It doesn't hurt them, but it scares them. Then you pick them up and you sit there and say, no. When Daddy says no, he means no. Now they're as smart as a puppy dog. It doesn't take 3 or 4 of those, and guess what? They have learned what no means. They know that when you say no and they continue to do it, they get scared. It doesn't hurt them, but you just pop their diaper and you talk this way to them, and guess what? You just now taught them what no means. Something is wrong when I go back in the children's department and 3-year-olds don't know what no means. Oh my gosh. People, it's concrete discipline for concrete thinkers. Is everyone with me? Now, look at the slide on the back wall again, and notice that somewhere around the age of 7 years old, children begin to develop their critical thinking skills, which means that you can start reasoning with them and explaining why they can or can't do certain things. So at this age, you spend more time explaining what you expect from them and why you expect that, and it needs to make sense. It needs to be more than just, because I said so, that's why. Now, here's what's funny, and I don't mean funny ha-ha, I mean funny sad. Most parents do just the opposite of what they should do in the first 2 stages of their child's mental development. When their children are small and are concrete thinkers, they're trying to explain in abstract terms why they shouldn't be doing things, and as I said, it goes right over the head of the child. But when their children finally get to the point where they can understand the why behind the rules, the parents start using the old, because I said so, that's why. And I'm thinking, really? Really? You spent hours trying to reason with a 3-year-old that doesn't have the mental ability to understand reasoning. And then when your child develops mentally to the point they can understand reasoning, you refuse to give an explanation or a reason for your rules. Are you nuts? No, you're not nuts. You just don't understand the cognitive development of children and how it affects the way you parent. Now, I'm not saying that you ever allow your child to argue with you when they reach the 2nd stage. That's rule number 1. You don't ever argue with a child. But when they get to the age where they can understand reasoning, you state the rules and you explain the reasoning behind the rules. And if they want to discuss it, you have a civilized conversation with them, but it should never turn into an argument. And let me say this. At this stage in a child's mental development, sometimes there are more effective punitive consequences than spanking. You just have to find out what they are. Now, I'm not saying that you can't spank at this age. Trust me, I got spanked all the way to high school at school. Yeah. You can spank at this age. I'm just saying that sometimes there are more effective punitive consequences than spanking. Can I give you a personal example? When I was in 5th grade, I went to Greenwood Elementary School. The Nolans are not musical. We like music, but guys, we're just not musical. I don't play an instrument. I don't want to play an instrument. I can't sing. I don't want to sing. I never desired to be in a rock concert or a rock star. No. But in 5th grade, we always had a music teacher come in once a week, and we had a music hour. This was a new teacher. The teacher really didn't know how to control the classroom, especially if they had students like Alan Nolan in it. She would say something, and I would be able to twist that, and it would really be funny, and the whole class would get to laughing. And before long, the class was out of control. And she'd been there about 3 weeks, and I knew she had me pegged, but it didn't matter. She was a newbie. And she said, Mr. Nolan, let's go outside. So she took me outside, and she went to the next classroom. She asked the teacher to come out, because back then you had to have a witness, and she spanked me. When I stood up, I laughed. She said, Mr. Nolan, why are you laughing? I said, because your spankings feel like tickles. She was a woman. Yeah, you spank like my mama. Oh, it made her mad. She took me to the office. Jim White was the principal at the time. When she took me to the office of Mr. Jim White, I straightened up. This was a man. I had learned something. Men can spank. But he threw a curveball. He allowed the teacher to go back to the classroom. He looked at me and said, Mr. Nolan, I'm going to give you 2 choices, or give you a choice. You can either take a spanking, and I'll give you 3 licks, or tomorrow you can sit at your desk during recess, all 3 recess periods, and not go out and play. Well, it didn't take me a second. I'll take a spanking. You might be a man. It might hurt and sting for 3 to 5 minutes, but I am not sitting at my desk and not able to go out to recess and play. So I took that spanking. Now, years later, I'm looking back and I'm thinking, those poor teachers, if they had learned one thing, if they had learned what would really get my attention, they wouldn't have had to spend all those hours spanking me. All they would have had to say is, Alan, if you get your name on the board with 3 marks, tomorrow you don't get to go out and play at recess. You'll sit at your desk. Oh my gosh, you would have had my attention. Now, it's not the same thing for every child. I'm just telling you that sometimes there are more effective punitive consequences than spanking. You just have to find out what they are. For me, it was playing. You make me sit at my desk while everyone else is going outside and playing softball. Oh my gosh. Spank me! Now, look back at the slide, and let's talk about the final stage in childhood. And I'm talking about the middle school and the high school years. Now, this is a time when your children are at a greater risk of rebelling against the core values and beliefs that you tried to instill within them. And let me explain why. And in order to do so, I'm going to have to go off on a tangent and explain man's basic needs. You don't mind me doing that, do you? All right. Man has 2 types of needs: physical needs and personal needs. Physical needs are things like food, shelter, and clothing, etc. Personal needs are what all people need in order to be happy and fulfilled. Now, believe it or not, there are only 2 things that we need in order to be happy and fulfilled, and no, men, it is not beer and sex. Every time I bring that up, there's always a man that goes, hey, honey, it's beer and sex. And then afterwards, they think they're funny. They come to me and say, Pastor, I'll tell you what I told my wife when you said there's 2 things we need to be happy and fulfilled. I said it's beer and sex. No, it's not beer and sex. But it is pretty simple. The 2 things that we need to be happy and fulfilled are significance and security. Every person needs, not wants, needs significance and security. Significance means that we're somebody. We're important and we matter. Turn to Proverbs chapter 18, verse number 4, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Notice what this says. This is a very important principle here. Notice what it says. The human spirit can endure a sick body, but who can bear a crushed spirit? Now, in this context, the word spirit at the end of the verse refers to our self-esteem. Yeah. So what this verse is saying is that when our self-esteem is crushed or our self-esteem is wounded, it's almost impossible to bear. And you want to know why? It's because we all need to feel good about ourselves. We all need to feel like we're important and we matter. We're not invisible. I'm somebody. Security means that we feel loved. We need to know that someone cares about us and that someone loves us. So in essence, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that in order to be happy and fulfilled, we need to feel that we are important and that we're loved. Let me say that again. Everyone, in order to be happy and fulfilled, needs to feel like they're important and they're loved. And it doesn't matter whether you're a child or you're an adult. We all need those two things. Now, in the first two stages of childhood, our significance and our security comes from our family. But when we enter into this third stage, those teenage years, we begin to look to our peers and to our friends for our significance and security. In other words, it becomes more important to us what our peers and friends think about us than it does our family. Now, in this third stage of childhood, fitting in with our peers is what makes us feel like we're significant. And if we don't fit in, we feel like we're insignificant and we don't really matter. So in this quest to fit in, kids start forming new beliefs, and especially beliefs on how to fit in. Now let me explain what a belief is. Anything that's thought to be true becomes a belief, and beliefs are very powerful. So if your kid believes that they have to party in order to fit in, they'll start partying. If they think they have to be popular in order to fit in, they'll do just about anything to be popular. And it's at this point that their core values start changing. And that's when parents start asking, what happened to my sweet, naive, perfect child? Because their wonderful little child is now smoking dope and getting picked up for DUIs. They're sneaking out of the house at night to meet up with their friends. What happened? Well, they entered into that third stage of mental development. Yeah. And in this stage, children start looking for significance and security outside of the family. They start seeking it from their peers, and they start forming certain beliefs on how to get it, which starts changing their core values. So what do you do as a parent? Well, let's roll back to week number 2, and let's look at those two very important axioms. Here's axiom number 1. The stronger the bond with your child, the more likely they'll be to embrace your core values and beliefs. What's axiom number 2? The weaker the bond with your child, the less likely they'll be to embrace your core values and beliefs. So you have to form a very strong bond with your child, and that bond has to continue into the teen years. Even though I'm talking about punishment, that's just like 3% of it. 97% of ministering to your child in these first two stages is forming a strong bond, giving them significance and security. You're important to me. You're the most important thing in the world. I told you about my mama rubbing my head and saying, you're perfect. If you weren't perfect, I would know it. I'm your mama. I know everything about you, and you are perfect. Let me tell you, I was someone in my mom's eyes. I was loved. And let me tell you, that's where my significance and security came from until I reached junior high. And then, what does it matter what my mom thinks? What do my peers think? Yeah, but it was very important for her to have that bond with me, and that bond had to continue on into the teen years. And communication became even more important than ever because my mom was now competing with my peers. You see, teenagers will go one of two ways. Either they're resolved to follow the core values and beliefs that you've instilled within them, or they're resolved to follow the core values of the world and the beliefs of their peers. Now, sometimes kids experiment. And it doesn't mean that they've rejected the core values and beliefs that you tried to instill within them. They're just experimenting and they're testing both sides. And that's what I did. I got in junior high and high school, and man, I started testing both sides. But here's what's interesting. Once I came out of high school and went to college, I didn't want to join a fraternity. Shoot, I'd already done that with Key Club. In ninth grade, I'd already had my butt paddled by all my peers. I'd already had pickle races and all the other things that you did. I didn't need to join a fraternity and pledge. I didn't need to party. I'd already done that. And how? Because of the bond I had with my mom. It was her core values and her beliefs. Those are the ones I embraced. But what my mom didn't want, what you don't want, is for your child to come to the conclusion that your core values and your beliefs are wrong. And they resolve to follow the world's values and the beliefs of their peers. No, you don't want that. And some kids do that. Your bond's not strong enough with them in the first two stages of their mental development. And when they hit that third stage, they lose your core values. And they start following the world's core values. They don't hang on to your beliefs. They accept and they start following their peers' beliefs. And you've lost them. The church is now trying to figure out why millennials are not in church. And the church is trying to figure out what it did wrong. The church did nothing wrong. You want to know why millennials aren't in church? Because of their parents. They went into this third stage. And then they adopted the world's core values and they adopted their peers' beliefs. And it doesn't jive with the church. And that's why they're not in church. We're going to make some major changes in our church this summer, but the reason we aren't is because we've got to help you parents to develop a strong bond with your kids so that they don't reject your core values and beliefs. So, there are 3 stages to a child's mental development. Rules. Why do we call that rules? It's because they're concrete thinkers. They don't understand abstract concepts. They understand everything literally. So they're, as concrete thinkers, we lay down the rules. This is the way it is. The second stage is reason. Why? Because their cognitive reasoning skills are developed. Now we don't just lay down the rules, we explain the rules. We tell them why there's rules, why it's best for them. Now remember, this we're talking about discipline, but all during this time, that's only like 3% of what you're doing. The majority of the time, you're building this bond through love. You're giving them significance and security. Then you get to the last one, and that's resolve. And this is where your child resolves to either embrace your core values or embrace the world's core values. Now, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down, and we're going to close with this. Your role as a parent changes as your child's mental development changes. Let me say that again. Your role as a parent changes as your child's mental development changes. In the first stage of the life, you are the commander. You lay down the rules. In the second stage, you're the instructor. You're explaining why. In the third stage, you're the coach. Why do I say coach? Because a coach doesn't play the game. When your kids become teenagers, you can't do it for them anymore. Man, they're going to make their own choices. They're going to go their own way. All you can do is coach them. But then when they get out of that, here's what's great. You become a consultant. Now my kids ask for my advice. That's what you want. Yeah. Now, let me say this about the Kingstone Bible. We have Kingstone Bibles for sale. But if your child is not reading, the Kingstone Bible is not for them. Not to do devotions with them. The Kingstone Bible is to do devotions for those who've entered the second stage and the third stage. In the first stage, it'll go right over their head. So we're going to have another Bible we'll offer in about 2 months. And it's for when your children are at that age 0 to 6. And we'll explain how to use it.